My guest today is Dave Sanderson, and he's an inspirational survivor, speaker, and author. His thoughts on leadership have made him an internationally sought out speaker. When US Airways Flight 1549, or the Miracle on the Hudson, ditched into the Hudson River on January 15th in 2009, Dave Sanderson knew he was exactly where he was supposed to be. The last passenger off the back of the plane on that fateful day, he was largely responsible for the well-being and safety of others, risking his own life in frigid water to help other passengers off the plane. Despite the hazards to himself, Sanderson thought only of helping others and emerged from the wreckage with a mission to encourage others to do the right thing. Well, that's quite a story, Dave. I want to welcome you to our show, Living Regret Free.
Well, thank you very much, Gail, for having me. I'm excited to be with you today.
Well, I'll tell you that incident will be forever in everybody's mind, I think. And you were the last passenger off. I mean, I can't even imagine that because I fly just about every week. So, why don't you just take us through that day on January 15th and tell us about your personal story?
Well, thank you very much. Yes, the big point that I usually try to make is I wasn't supposed to be on that plane. I was scheduled to be on the 5 o'clock flight. But that day I was working in a distribution center in Brooklyn in my job as a sales manager. And we started our day about 5 o'clock, so we got done about 10. And I travel like you just mentioned. I travel 100,000 miles a year. So any chance to get home to my wife and 4 kids a little early, I usually try to take advantage of that. And that's what I did that day. Got on an earlier flight, which was US Airways Flight 1549. And that's what sort of started my adventure at that point in time.
Wow. Well, you say that you really believe that you were supposed to be on that flight. Why did you feel that way?
Well, I felt that way because I wasn't supposed to be on that flight. I was working at the end of a 3-day business trip, and I think that I was put on that plane for a reason. Whether that reason was just to be there to help people or be there just as somebody to be a part of a situation to help clarify what was going on, I don't know, but I think God wanted me on that plane for a reason, and that's why that she put me on that flight. And I gave up a first class seat. I was, and from on the 5 o'clock flight for seat 15A. So it wasn't because I wanted to move up in status. It was just because I wanted to get home a little earlier.
So, describe what your life was like before the flight and after the flight. I mean, how has your life changed? I mean, I assume that there were interviews for you and publicity for you, or did you get recognized for anything right away? Tell us just a little bit about that whole happening.
So before the situation, I was a sales manager for a company by the name of Oracle, and I traveled, and I was responsible for this consumer packaged goods area for the southeast of the United States. But additionally, I was a head of security for a gentleman named Tony Robbins, and I got the opportunity to not only be with him for 10 years, but travel with him and be around people that he hung with. So I learned a lot of the skills and strategies that I used that day, primarily in that role there. But one of the things that I look back on, and it would change dramatically for me, Gail, was the way I prioritized my time. Where I look back, I modeled what my dad did. My dad traveled like I was doing. He was making a living and doing what he thought was right for the family, which I was doing the same thing. But what I realized after the plane crash and what happened right afterwards is that my kids just wanted me home to be with them. They probably could have gone without a lot of the niceties that we were having at that point just to have more time. And I was missing a lot of my kids' activities because I was working so hard to give them all the opportunities that I never had. So the biggest change that I made was the way I prioritized my time, where like right now, everything I do is scheduled around my kids and my wife's activities. And so if we have two conflicting situations, my wife and kids' time comes first, which would have not happened, candidly. I'm not proud to say that, but it probably would have not happened that way before the plane crash.
So, are you working at a different job now, or what are you doing that allows you to do that?
So I did go back to work for Oracle for a few years after the plane crash. My wife liked health insurance and liked those few things, but I had a call. I knew I had a calling because one thing that Tony and I always talked about was he was in my grill about working for myself. And he'd always ask me that question every time I would see him, and I always gave him a lame excuse. And he's not one of those people you can give excuses to that take it very lightly. So he was really encouraging me and coaching me to do my own thing. So about now it's 2 years ago this year, I left the Oracle and started not only speaking around the world about my situation, but sharing the lessons and strategies and workshops. And I just wrote my own book with Cindy Wrightson called Moments Matter to share some additional details. So I'm now working for myself, trying to be an entrepreneur and adding value to those who have gone through or potentially could go through a life-changing situation, what I call, Gail, your own personal plane crash.
Well, there's a couple things that you've said, Dave, that we really should talk about, and that is, you were talking about the things that you did so that you could give your wife and your kids a better life, so they wouldn't have to go through what you went through. And yet, it's very interesting because there's a lot of dialogue today that I'm sure you're aware of about kids who are entitled and how we enable our kids and how they don't know what it's like to work or to suffer or to go through a lot of things that therefore don't prepare them for the life ahead. And, it is interesting that we try to give our kids everything. And yet I remember having to work for a lot of things because my family was certainly not well off. And yet, my parents wanted me to have a great education and go to college and all of that. However, I still had to work for my stuff, so to speak. And I learned how to save money, and I learned how, what a dollar was worth. I was banking 10 cents when everybody else was banking a dollar. So I think there are probably valuable lessons in there for your kids as well. What do you think?
Most definitely. That's a great distinction, Gail, that you just made is I was like you. I had to pay for my own college education after the freshman year because I didn't make the grades, and my dad sort of put it on me. And so I had to basically work for my education and had a high level of value. And Kayla, I just wrote a blog about this what you just mentioned about how I'm guilty of it, like many people are guilty, trying to give our kids everything. But I think right now, one of the things that I've changed dramatically in the last 2 years is making sure my kids can face some of these potential risks. And my kids have to work now to pay for their car insurance and things that other kids don't have to do. And they questioned me. But, Kaylee, I think my kids need to learn that there's a value not only to money, but value to giving back and contribution. So I think that one of the things I talk when I speak to youth and colleges and athletic teams is about that is, these risks that are put in front of you are put there for a reason. And you have to face the risk because if you don't face them one day in your life, and this was a perfect example of the plane crash, and everybody's got, like I just mentioned, a personal plane crash in their life, or something's going to happen. And if you have never had to face adversity, then how are you going to face that moment that you have to make a critical, potentially life-changing decision? So I agree. I try to talk to these kids and the millennials about it's not bad that you have to make decisions, and because there's a consequence to every decision, and that's one of the lessons I teach my kids every day, positive or negative. And if you have a negative one, then hopefully you'll make it a learning experience and make sure it never happens again. And so I appreciate your that question because I think that's one of the most critical things that's going on in this country right now.
Well, it's true. I won't say that this was a critical situation, but I'll never forget when I was in college and I tried out for something well, there was a whole story that goes along with it. But when I called my mother up in tears, she said to me, "Grow up." She
Yep.
said, "This is not the big time. This is college. If you can't take it in college, you're not going to take it out of the real world." And so it's true. I mean, I think sometimes your kids will give you arguments why they should have this or that, but it's really true. They do need to go through it and learn. So how has home life changed for you? In other words, your kids wanted you home more. They had you home more. Your wife wanted you home more. She has you home more. But then there were other things that they had to give up. So what's the situation like now?
Well, once again, that's another great question, a great distinction, because I was making significant money doing what I was doing, and as you start any business, you learn very quickly. You're readjusting your lifestyle, and so some of the things that they were enjoying and I was enjoying before, such as nice vacations and things like that, those have been scaled back. They're a little more focused and a little less happening. But what the biggest thing that they're seeing is my presence, and they see me on TV, they've seen me doing these things, but one of the things I wanted my kids to see me doing is walking my talk. And so being home, they can actually see, am I living congruently with my values? So hopefully maybe just sort of get off on them a little bit, or share with them a little bit that, hey, my dad does it. Maybe walking your talk and living your values and being congruent, which is once again, I think one of the biggest challenges in this country, people not being congruent, is something that they can hopefully live their lives and share with their kids when they get to that point in life.
Well, I'm glad to hear you say that, because I do think it sets up a great value system. But you said you wrote this book. I know it's called Moments Matter. So why did you decide to call it that? And I assume that the whole book is about your experience, but tell us a little bit about what the book has in it.
Well, thank you. So when Cindy Wrightson, who helped me write this book, and I were talking about the different titles, and we were looking back, and I made a statement in one of our conversations, like, I said, Cindy, one of the things I realized through this whole situation is that all the moments in my life mattered, because you never know that one moment that you may learn something that may all of a sudden help you when maybe a life-threatening situation or somebody else. And I point out two things where when Captain Sullenberger attended the Air Force Academy, he learned how to glide a plane back in the 60s. And all of a sudden, back in 2009, he had to employ that skill. That moment, all of a sudden, which seemed insignificant, mattered. When my mom and dad made me learn how to swim when I was young, didn't seem that significant. I thought everybody learned how to swim. I found out later a lot of people don't. But that moment mattered to me at that moment, because I had to swim for my survival. And that's how we came up with this title. It's like all these people don't realize these little things in your life that you don't think are significant. And I tell my kids to do something, look at me like I'm crazy to ask them to do something. I think you never know, and that one thing you may learn may save yourself or save somebody else. And that's why we named the book Moments Matter, and that's how it really came about. And so it's not only about my story, which is very, very well out there in the public, which I speak about, and it's been other books and publications. It's about these 12 lessons and strategies that I and other people use that day on the plane that translate not only to business but personal life situations, such as how to manage your mind when something hits the fan. You can go one way, you can go another way. How do you manage your mind so you can get your outcome, or how do you communicate at a different level, where a lot of people communicate only in one level? There's a lot of different ways to communicate, and I point out, like in my personal situation with my wife, we were having some challenges. I know some people have challenges in marriages, and that happened probably 10, 15 years ago, and it was our communication. And what I realized is my wife is a very auditory person. She wants to talk. She wants to get her point out. Do not interrupt my wife. And I would interrupt my wife because I'm a visual talker. I got it. You don't have to explain 30 minutes on how to do it. I got it. And so we were clashing until I all of a sudden realized that she was an auditory talker. So all of a sudden I communicated auditorily and let her talk for 30 minutes. And when she took a breath, I'd ask a question. And all of a sudden, our relationship changed. And that's when I really started realizing these little things that you learn are skill sets that people can apply not only in business but their personal life to make their lives better. And that's what the book's really about.
Well, you're right, and I think there is a generalization too about men and women. In other words, I think women do like to talk. They are certainly much more auditory. Not that they're not visual or kinesthetic, but they're much more auditory. But men are more, action takers, and they're the ones that will say. I mean, I would tell you that. Of course, my husband's been gone now for 8 years, but I can tell you, I know he never listened to what I had to say.
Mute button, right? The mute button. Yep. Yep.
Because it wasn't important to him,
Yep.
and luckily we got through all of that. But you also brought up something else, that you had worked with Tony Robbins. In fact, I saw Tony on television not long ago, and you said he encouraged you to go out on your own. And I think, that's kind of what you're doing now with your speaking. I mean, isn't it wonderful that when you work for somebody, that you encourage them to be independent and make decisions on their own and possibly go out on their own? I mean, that was a gift that Tony gave you as well. And I think that's so important. And I know that it's difficult sometimes when I go into companies and speak. I have to be very careful about what I tell the employees to do, because I don't want it to ruffle the feathers of
Right.
the company, because I know, that's a big part of it. You don't want to tell people to be independent and go out on their own, and they're being paid, by a company, and they're paying you to come in. However, I will tell you, because I do have my ethics and so forth. I have told many company heads that they are the problem. I mean, in many instances, because the direction does come from the top. And so I've told them that. Of course, I've never been asked back a lot of the times, but